Japan, the God Emperor, has unconditionally surrendered. It took not one, but two atomic bombs to do it. There are many American academics and other critics who talk about how inhumane it was to use atomic weapons on people. After all, the civilian Japanese government had been offering peace talks if only we would guarantee the emperor's safety. The civilian government of Japan had no power. The army and the navy, particularly the army, was running everything. And even after one atom bomb destroyed one of their cities, they were still fighting on. The two atomic bombs, in my personal opinion, have saved more Japanese lives than anything in their entire history. Because the shock and awe of those two fireballs going into the sky with their mushroom clouds shocked them out of their suicidal insanity. It shocked them out of a course that would have destroyed their nation and many other people around the world, including my in-laws, who were saved by the atom bomb. It is not reasonable to look at other cultures and say, they're just like us. They think just like us. We would have surrendered. Why didn't they? Why didn't we give them a chance? Well, we did, year after year. But they would not take the chance of an unconditional surrender without guarantees of their God Emperor's safety. With two atom bombs and some backdoor indication that we would not get rid of their emperor, they surrendered. When we started talking about World War II, I told you about Admiral Halsey riding in on the USS Enterprise the night of December 8th to 9th, 1941, less than 24 hours after the Pearl Harbor attacks. And seeing the burning battleships, he said, when I'm done with them, the only place that the Japanese language will be spoken will be in hell. Had those bombs not been used, had the Japanese people not been shocked out of their suicidal insanity, had the Japanese army not lost its power because the emperor took it away from them, the outcome is literally unfathomable. But it likely would have been a literal fulfillment of Admiral Halsey's threat. It would have been the end of the Japanese nation. So, the Second World War is over. V-J Day is August 15th, 1945. And since the Japanese surrendered before the Russians can get a hold of any Japanese territory, they'll have to satisfy themselves with propping up the Chinese Communist Party, and in North Korea, propping up the Communist Party of Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandpappy. But this mischief that they're going to wage, and there's a lot of it, on the Asiatic mainland is not going to be repeated on the Japanese home islands, although they do try to get Hokkaido Island at least. As it is, they get a few of the Kuril Islands, which the Japanese still dispute and claim, and the Russians and Japanese still have disputes over the islands off the northeastern coast of Hokkaido. The Second World War has come to an end. Now, what kind of world is left? Well, it's a world where every nation has been bombed back to the Stone Age, except for the United States, every industrialized nation. Britain, bombed. France, conquered after being bombed. Japan, bombed, and then occupied. All of the Germany, bombed and invaded and divided. So, Europe and Asia are open graveyards and open sewers where people are literally living in the rubble. The British, who are the only nation in the world to start World War II for moral reasons, the Germans and the Axis powers started it for aggression. The French get dragged in by the British. The Americans get dragged in by the Japanese. The British are the only people in the world can hold their heads up high and say, yep, we got involved in World War II because it was the right thing to do to try to defend Poland. Did they defend Poland? No, but they got involved in a war that they didn't have to try. Britain loses more by winning World War II than Germany does by losing it. Let me say that again. In economic terms, Britain loses more by winning World War II than Germany does by losing World War II. After the war, Americans cut off aid to the Allies without warning. The British send a representative, John Maynard Keynes, the father of macroeconomics and socialist or mixed economy economics, who goes to the United States and says, look, we carried the burden of the war for the first few years while you guys simply sent us weapons. To which the American Congress said, nuts to you, we're cutting off your aid. Keynes ended up dying of a heart attack just after getting back. Britain did not get an extension on any loan, and so the economy of Britain was fundamentally had the rug yanked out from under it by short-sighted American politicians. Britain finally got a loan in 1947, but the British economy was weakened, and it didn't really recover from World War II until around the 1990s or the early 2000s. It only paid their loan off in 2006. The German economy, on the other hand, in West Germany anyway, the free part of Germany, recovered by the late 50s, early 1960s. Because their economy, even though bombed back to the Stone Age, was not as overextended as the British were. The British lose more economically by winning World War II than the Germans do by losing it. The only country in the world that is largely unaffected, except by overseas casualties, is the United States of America. And every war zone is filled with these people known as dispos, dispossessed people, displaced people, refugees. And these refugees they don't have homes. Their villages have been destroyed. There are many of them shell-shocked. And they're wandering across Europe and Asia, and something's got to be done or it's going to be a massive human rights catastrophe. So after winning the war, we try to do something for these people. As one of the incidental materials, I'm going to show you the fallen of World War II. And that will give you some notion of the mathematics. The world was exhausted in a way that I cannot describe. It was, in terms of the sheer numbers, much worse than what happened at the end of the Napoleonic Wars. And everyone who lived through it was changed by it. One of the reasons that the Cold War probably never went hot is because the Soviet leadership still included, up through the era of Gorbachev, some in the late 80s, some people who had personal experience with how horrible the Great Patriotic War was, which is what the Soviets called World War II, the Great Patriotic War. No one really wanted to go into that kind of world again. And so the Russians never pushed it beyond a certain point. And because they never pushed it beyond a certain point, the world survived the first 50, 60, 70, 80 years of its atomic infancy. One of the great dangers today is that the Chinese communist leadership has no experience with anything like this. The last thing they experienced was a Communist Party-inflicted mass slaughter, the worst mass murder in human history during peacetime, called the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. And that's something they did to the Chinese people. When people talk about my anti-Chinese communist stance, they try to call me a racist. No, I love Chinese people. I have dear friends who are from China and who escaped that hellhole. I love China, and I appreciate that the greatest victims of China's Communist Party are the Chinese people. It's the way it always is. The Second World War is over, but the world is exhausted and damaged and filled with exhausted and damaged people. But what comes out amidst the tales of misery and horror and glory and wonder, the fire bombings and the atomic bombings and all of it, is something out of Eastern Europe that Hitler's Germany visited upon the world that's new. Not a pogrom. A final solution.